Good evening. Thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. This is a short video just to give an introduction to quite a fascinating book by the renowned philosopher Antony Flew. This is the title of the book, There is a God. As you can see, it also says how the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. This book is the winner of the Christianity Today Book Award. Just wanted to go through some excerpts from this book. First of all, Antony Flew is one of the most renowned philosophers of the 20th century. He published extensively in support of atheism over a period of 50 years, half a decade. Half a century. And finally, he came to the conclusion that the evidence leads to firm scientific belief based on substantial scientific evidence that there is a God. So he wrote this book near the end of his life. He was, I think, over 80 when he wrote this book. And as you can see, because he was an atheist, he used to say there is no God. But now he basically scratched this off and wrote there is a God. Now, Antony Flew did not end up becoming a theist. He became a deist, which means that he believed in the one creator who controls this universe. But he did not join or embrace any organized religion. And that is okay. He was quite honest about his beliefs, his journey as an atheist, and his journey back to theism, not theism, but deism at least, that there is a God. This book, or this change of mind of Antony Flew, after he wrote extensively in defense of atheism, of course, his change of mind made headlines. In the preface of this book, you can see this preface is written by Roy Abraham Varghese. He says here, famous atheist now believes in God. And then it says, one of the world's leading atheists now believes in God. More or less, based on scientific evidence. He says that this quotation, that famous atheist now believes in God, this was the headline of a December 9, 2004 Associated Press story that went on to say, a British philosophy professor who has been a leading champion of atheism for more than half a century has changed his mind. This is the significance of this change in mind and how it affected many people of thought. Many people were basically, especially theists, jubilated this kind of conversion or change in mind by Antony Flew, because Antony Flew's conversion back to deism at least, or theism, because at the end of his book, of course, he starts to express his opinion about organized religion as well. So he was going into that, but he did not have firm belief as yet in organized religion, but he was heading that way. Of course, this book was celebrated by theists from various backgrounds. For instance, Francis S. Collins, the New York Times best-selling author of The Language of God, he says, in his youth, atheist Antony Flew committed to Socratic principle of following the evidence wherever it may lead. After a lifetime of probing philosophical inquiry, this towering and courageous intellect has now concluded the evidence leads conclusively to God. His colleagues in the Church of Fundamentalist Atheism will be scandalized by his story, but believers will be greatly encouraged. Michael Behe, for instance, the author of Darwin's Black Box and the Edge of Evolution, he says, a stellar philosophical mind ponders the latest scientific results. The conclusion is, a God stands behind the rationality of nature. These are great minds who are writing these comments, and of course Anthony Flew is a great mind himself at his own right, especially that he was an atheist for so long. But this conversion of his, actually, as he states in his book, it took him 20 years of thought until he came to that firm conclusion, and he stated all his evidences in this book. So this is a book that I would recommend very strongly for people who are concerned with such subjects. I would recommend it to atheists. I would also recommend it to theists who want to learn the arguments behind that support their belief. John Polkinghorne, the author of Belief in God in an Age of Science, he says, there will be considerable interest in the clear and accessible account that Anthony Flew gives of the pilgrimage of reason. And this is actually, this description, pilgrimage of reason, is how Anthony Flew described his conversion. He called it pilgrimage of reason. He used philosophical logic and reasoning to come to this conclusion. This was not a conclusion that he was pushed to by any kind of organized religion or kind of spiritual experience, as he clearly states in this book. Also, he says here, John Polkinghorne, he says that Anthony Flew gives of the pilgrimage of reason which has led him from atheism to belief in God. Richard Swinburne, the author of The Existence of God, he says, Anthony Flew has been for most of his life, a very well-known philosophical champion of atheism. He has now written a clear and readable book tracing his path back to theism, revealing his total openness to new rational arguments. And the praises go on and on about this book and its author. I will read one more comment made by John Hick, Fellow of the Institute for Advanced Research in Arts and Social Sciences, University of Birmingham. He says, this is a fascinating and very readable account of how a distinguished philosopher who was a brilliant atheist for most of his working life came to believe in the intelligent design of the universe, and hence deism. This book will provoke as much debate as his previous atheist writings, and so on. The praises go on and on. I will quote a little bit more from this book. I just want to quote a little bit from the preface and introduction. As Roy Abraham Varghese mentions here, he says, it is not too much to say that within the last 100 years, no mainstream philosopher has developed the kind of systematic, comprehensive, original, and influential exposition of atheism that is to be found in Anthony Flew's 50 years of anti-theological writings. Imagine this man spent 50 years establishing the basis for atheism, and then after 20 years of thought, the last 20 years of those 50 years, he started doubting his thoughts and the basis of his atheism, and he started using logical thinking again, and he traced his way back to deism, to believe in God. This is quite an amazing journey and quite a courageous decision by this man. Also, Anthony Varghese says here, Flew facilitated the rebirth of rational theism in analytical philosophy after the dark days of logical positivism. Later on, Anthony Varghese, who wrote the preface of this book, he talks about Dawkins a bit. Richard Dawkins, a famous atheist and biologist. He says, Richard Dawkins mentions that Bertrand Russell was his role model. And he described him as a determined opponent of organized religion. This shows you the deception of some atheist scholars. Because this is what Dawkins says about Bertrand Russell, but what does his own daughter say about him? And what does Bertrand Russell say about himself? Bertrand Russell's daughter Tate, she says, and that is in the autobiography that she wrote for her father, she says, nevertheless, well, this is what Tate says, that the whole life of her father was a search for God. Bertrand Russell, the famous philosopher, the whole of his life was a search for God. So, and then she says, somewhere at the back of my father's mind, at the bottom of his heart, in the depth of his soul, there was an empty space that had once been filled with God or by God. And he never found anything else to put in it. And then Anthony Varghese here quotes something that Russell wrote. This is what Russell says. He says, nothing can penetrate the loneliness of the human heart except the highest intensity of the sort of love that religious teachers have preached. This is in the autobiography of Bertrand Russell.